So I was just at a roundtable of the Federal Reserve. It was a really nice inter-industry. So two of the reserve governors were there. I was actually with Anatoly from Solana and Sergey from Chainlink and Ilya from Near and Brad from XRP. So it was a very nice roundtable. And we had a chance to directly interact with the Federal Reserve. And the Fed is trying to figure out, what is their role, place, and purpose.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is really going to be a follow-on video from a production that we released where we looked at what Christopher Waller from the Fed had to say at the SALT conference in regards to embracing distributed ledger technology. Now, Christopher Waller at the Fed is literally in charge of payments. And that led us on to looking at how the FedNow from the Federal Reserve, in regards to their certified service providers, 27 out of the 37 service providers actually have either direct partnerships or links to Ripple, which leads us to believe that the Federal Reserve themselves are actually going to embrace, which Christopher Waller very much confirms, distributed ledger technology, and likely Ripple and thus XRP. So I want to start the video off by kind of recapping on that. And then we're going to go and we're going to take a look at the fact that a Federal Reserve member from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, David Andolfatto, has essentially been tweeting and talking about Ripple specifically and the Federal Reserve's usage of it really since 2014. And this really does make one wonder, why has all of this been going on very much behind the scenes? I think we're at a point now where it's about to reach velocity. It's about to come to fruition. Federal Reserve have been looking into Ripple and distributed ledger technology for as long as it's been about, probably even before the official introduction of Bitcoin. And we're now starting to get confirmation of that, certainly with the likes of the Federal Reserve's Waller coming out and saying that we are going to embrace this technology to modernize payments. That's what they're trying to do with the FedNow. The FedNow has links to Ripple via its service providers. And obviously the Federal Reserve, through individuals like David Andolfatto, have actually been looking into the likes of Ripple and XRP since 2014. Let's first of all kick this video off by recapping on what Fed's Christopher Waller had to say at the SALT conference. Then I'll recap on the 27, it's actually 27 plus of the nearly 40 service providers for FedNow, the certified service providers actually haven't linked to Ripple. And then we're going to get into what David has actually said about using Ripple and XRP. Let's dive into this.
And we're kicking it off all this morning with Fed Governor Christopher Waller. So Governor Waller was appointed by President Trump in 2020 to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. In addition to his monetary policy duties, he also oversees the U.S. payment system. And I would like to editorialize a little bit and say that Governor Waller, before supporting crypto was cool in Washington, he was supporting stablecoins and innovations in the U.S. payment space.
It's an exciting time to work in a technology-driven revolution, where the latest advances in computing power, data processing, distributed networks have fueled growth in innovative new payment services. This includes 24/7 instant payments, user-friendly digital wallets, mobile payment apps, and stablecoins and other digital assets. There have also been some who have been fearful or skeptical of innovation in this space. But we only have to look to history to see that the evolution of the payment system has long been a story of technological advancement. There's nothing to be afraid of when thinking about smart contracts, tokenization, or distributed ledgers in everyday transactions. The technology available today might be new, but leveraging innovative technology to build new payment services is not a new story. I hold the view that it is generally the private sector that can most reliably and efficiently allocate resources and take risks to explore the value of new technologies. I also see firsthand the important role of the Federal Reserve and that it plays in fostering a payment and settlement system that is both safe and efficient.
Private sector to foster new technologies, just like what Ripple has done with XRP and all the trials and tribulations that they've gone through. So that's Christopher Waller. He's the head of payments at the Federal Reserve, talking about embracing distributed ledger technology. And I believe that they're already doing that. This led us onto the FedNow system. Now, what the hell is the FedNow system? I'll give you guys just a quick overview. FedNow is the Federal Reserve's instant payment service. It launched in July 2023. It's lets banks and credit unions move money 24/7, 365 in real time, so payments settle within seconds instead of hours or days. The Fed operates it as a rail for instant transfers, meaning participating financial institutions can send and receive funds instantly on behalf of customers, like businesses paying suppliers, consumers paying bills, or moving money between accounts. So the Fed is using their FedNow system to modernize its US payment system, increase competition with the private sector networks, support faster, safer, and more accessible money movement nationwide. In short, the FedNow is the Fed's always-on payment highway for banks. And we showed you guys that if we dive over to the certified service providers, that over 27 of these, I'll leave this on screen whilst I go over to a tweet from this individual, over 27 of these actually have links directly to Ripple. And we've shown you other links in regards to FedNow and Ripple, whether it's the advisory board of the faster payments by the Federal Reserve. What we actually did was we dived over to a tweet from this individual who highlights that 27 out of the 37 FedNow certified service providers, which I've just flashed on screen, and I'll keep on screen whilst I read through these, actually have association with Ripple. And he goes on, I mean, it's a very well thought out piece. He starts off with ACI Worldwide Corp, Alacarte, Aptis Solutions, BNY Mellon, C&M Software LLC, CGI, COCC Incorporated, DCI, ECS Fin Incorporated, Finastra, FIS, Finsley, Serve Solutions LLC, Form 3, FPS Gold, IBT Apps, Jack Henry, Open Payments Network, Magic Writer, Metallicus, NAMI, NetXD Incorporated, Temenos, Payfinia, a Typhone company, Vertify Software LLC, Visa, and Valanti Technologies. So you can see that these are all individuals. He actually goes on and says, in addition, ACI World Corp. He actually goes on and actually links further references to Ripple or sort of partnerships or collaborations. So it's actually evident that the Federal Reserve is leveraging or going to leverage Ripple and potentially XRP. Now, I want to dive over to an individual called David Andolfatto. And he was the senior vice president at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So he was a Federal Reserve Bank member and somebody that has literally been, I'll show you this, tweeting about Ripple since 2014. So there's no doubt in my mind that the Federal Reserve have been looking into Ripple and its technology since at least 2014. Remember, it came about in 2012. Started off its life as OpenCoin. And this individual, who is now the chair of economics at the Department of Miami Herbert University of Miami, has been tweeting about Ripple for years. He says, recent IRS rulings make Bitcoin a loser, but Ripple a winner. And he says, as a reply to an individual, because Ripple is currency agnostic protocol. It always amazes me just how right Ripple was on its idea of actually using DLTs to revolutionize the financial system, like what Fed Waller is saying, not actually combat it and provide an alternative to it. Boy, how right it was on that village. And remember, this is all the way back in 2014, March the 31st, 2014. Here's one from Ripple in 2014. So this is literally a day after. It says, David Andolfatto, who was vice president of St. Louis Fed, room for beneficial coexistence for central banks together with Ripple. Very interesting. And the interesting thing about this was this has actually been altered at some point since that tweet was released. It says the Federal Reserve is positioning for a chaperone who has ordered the punch bowl removed just when the party was really warming up. Isn't that interesting? It says we've recently updated our website and we're working on fixing anything. Page not found, but we're glad you found us. So they actually removed this quote, likely due to the lawsuits and things like this. But this individual from St. Louis Fed has actually been talking about this for ages. Here's a recent tweet of his that took place at the start of this year. He said, "This guy's terrified of Ripple. Interesting." And he says a load of other things. You know, he's still tweeting about them. Obviously, he's no longer at the Federal Reserve, but he is still active and has been. He was at the Fed, I think, from 2009 to 2022. So a long time, and he's been talking about Ripple for a hell of a long time. There are actually clips of him. I want to play you two of them back to back of him actually talking about Ripple, and then we're going to conclude the video. I think what this shows is sort of further evidence that the likes of the Federal Reserve are clearly very interested in this technology, have been for a while. There's clear links. There's probably more links with Ripple and the Federal Reserve and the Fed now than there are any other sort of cryptocurrency project or company. And I think that's interesting, certainly given the world that we're embarking on and what Wall is setting out there in regards to embracing distributed ledger technology. Let's dive into these two clips from David.
People say, how can you trust, the Fed to do the bookkeeping? My response is, well, you don't expect the Fed to kind of steal your money. I mean, if the Fed can print all the money at once, it's not going to mess around with your bookkeeping. So, we have this big spreadsheet, the blockchain if you want, but it's just managed by the Fed, and it's very cheap, much cheaper than Bitcoin, if you're willing to delegate the responsibility to a third party. But then the downsides to all of that, of course, is you'd actually suppose you didn't want the Fed to be responsible for processing the payments. I mean, suppose, the Fed will likely impose some KYC restrictions on some purchases. They might not process some purchases that you might want to undertake. And so it was at that point that I said, well, we could, if we wanted to, extend the concept one step further. I'm not saying that this is ever going to happen, but just conceptually, you could imagine not FedWire for all, but kind of like a Fed coin, where what the Fed would do is actually just issue these Bitcoin-like objects, but and they would enforce a par exchange rate with the U.S. dollar. That would eliminate the exchange rate volatility. But they could delegate the clearing of these payments to some third party, some sort of Ripple-like protocol, or possibly even Bitcoin. I mean, we could delegate the responsibility of processing these electronic, FedCoin payments to the miners.
Very much sounds like exactly what they're doing with FedNow, right? And we know there's Ripple elements to that. Even though they're not a direct service provider, they are also advisors to the Faster Payments Task Force and things like this. There's another clip I want to play, and then I'm going to love and leave you. This is all very interesting stuff. It always amazes me just how much has been going on behind the scenes this whole time and what retail really don't know about Ripple's involvement with governments, central banks, and the financial industry more broadly, and Silicon Valley, so on and so forth. Let's dive into this second clip.
David, fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I'm one of the fellows who raised his hand when you asked who uses Ripple, Joe and myself. And I just want to say, it's very, I'm very happy to see that someone at the St. Louis Fed respects it at the very least. And I'm sure that from all the good things you said about it, many people in this room would like to hear more. But you mentioned that you foresee peer-to-peer currency-agnostic payment clearance systems such as Ripple coexisting with institutions such as central banks in the United States. And my question is, how are we going to see that happen? What is it going to take?
So thank you very much. And all the nice things I said about Ripple, everybody knows to short it. Well, how do I see it? I mean, like you said, Ripple is a currency-agnostic platform. It really doesn't care too much about creating and managing its money supply, although it does have its native money supply. So, it's doing, the way I exposited the idea, Ripple is handling the processing of payments for many of the world's unbanked people. Okay, and that the Fed is one institution that's providing a type of currency that people could use as payment using the Ripple protocol. But there may be other currencies. There could be Bitcoin. There could be the yen. So, I mean, I see room for coexistence. I mean, I see it today. I don't see any reason to doubt why it might not continue in the future.
And the interesting thing, since that video was made, was we know that they've kind of denied a central bank digital currency in the United States. They're going to give it to the private sector. And Ripple is there ready for that and ready to revolutionize payments, and it's clearly doing it. That's it from me, ladies and gents. Interesting video. It's interesting that a member of the Federal Reserve has actually been zealously tweeting about Ripple since 2014 and what they're doing. And now we see, fast forward today, the Fed is ready to embrace distributed ledger technology. And actually, in regards to their FedNow service, 27 plus of the individuals, the key service or certified service providers there, are actually already integrated with Ripple in some way, shape or form, perhaps directly or indirectly. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me. I want to know your thoughts in the comment section. I'll see you all in the next one.